Hello and welcome. This is the Repurpose Your Purpose podcast, and I am Aurora Minigadlo. If you are interested in doing work you love, changing careers, growing your business aligned with your values, check out my work at repurposeyourpurpose.com. Today is a little bit of a different episode. So, once in a while, I'll just be talking to you about something that I think can help you on your path of doing work you love. And today, I want to talk about one of my favorite books. Not just one of my favorite books, I would say this book is very significant to me because I changed my life after reading it. The book is The Surrender Experiment, okay, by Michael Singer. The Surrender Experiment. Oops, there you go. I'll have a link also and the title in the show notes. Here's what I want to say to you though. If you have not read the book yet, I really recommend you read the book first and then come back to this episode, okay? Because I'm going to share a ton of spoilers here. And this is because I want to talk about a lot of the misunderstandings, the most important lessons from the book and how they have been misunderstood or they can be misunderstood. So, a couple of disclaimers here. I'm not affiliated with Michael Singer or the Temple of the Universe. And I don't think you have to go on your own surrender experiment if this doesn't appeal to you, right? I think everybody has their own path. But if you are curious and if you have read the book, stick around. Okay, so I gift this book often, and I think it's because it makes it very real, in my opinion, what sometimes can be very abstract. Okay, so what do I mean? So Michael Singer wrote another book called The Untethered Soul. I think it's fantastic. It was his first book. I do recommend you read that second and you start with the surrender experiment because in my opinion, The Untethered Soul is still, is sharing these beautiful spiritual teachings. But when I read it, I had trouble understanding what that would look like in real life. Instead, the surrender experiment to me, even though, as I will share more, it's completely different than my life, it still made more sense because it was somebody's life. So I could sort of like see how that could play out. All right, so what is the surrender experiment about? It's an autobiographical book from Michael Singer, who sometime in the 70s had a moment where he noticed the voice in your head that talks to you all the time. You know, you have that voice in your head, you're constantly narrating your life or talking to yourself in your head, right? We all have that voice. Well, he really had this moment where he noticed it. And he noticed that every time he sort of followed that voice or let that voice lead him, he was a little bit more miserable or his life wasn't great. And in a moment, of meditation, he discovers meditation. In a moment of meditation, and you could say enlightenment, he realizes that he was so controlling of everything. He was always in this voice, so controlling, and everything was just perfect. The sun was coming up, and the trees were okay, and everything was just working without him having to constantly be in this control or worry. These are my words, but in this sort of like caught up in what I would say is on thinking. And so he decides in his 20s to live the rest of his life surrendering to life's perfection. Okay, and so the book is really what happens for 40 years once he decides to essentially go with the flow, what we would say. So when I read it, the book resonated with me like a ton. And you can listen to, the first episode of my podcast where I tell the story of my own change in life. But it really resonated because I recognized as he was talking about his experience or his enlightenment, I recognized that I was always in this sort of control mode, and worry mode. And I really desired what he described, which was more of this going with, life's perfection. But what I found out when I started to engage with the teachings in my own life from like a, real life decision making standpoint, is that it's really hard to actually understand exactly what it means. Okay. So I want to, tease out some of these teachings and really talk with you about what they look like and what they actually mean in my own way, from my own understanding. So the first thing that um, I think it's a very common misunderstanding, and a misunderstanding I had as well, is that it sounds like he's saying, say yes to everything. So in the book, there are many, many, many times where he says he didn't feel like doing something, but he still said yes because he was surrendering to life. Okay. I think the biggest one that me too. I as well was like, what is going on? Is when, he buys some land, is in Florida, he buys some land, and this woman, while he's away, decides to build a house on it, a little cabin. And when he comes back, she's like, well, it's your cabin, but I'm just gonna live here, in the cabin I'm building, and you can keep the cabin when I'm done living here, essentially, something like that. And he's of course upset, but then he meditates and he decides, I'm going with the flow, so lets her do it, right? And talk about, not setting boundaries there. So I think a lot of people, as I said, including me, when you read that book first, you think, okay, so everything I should say yes. Like, what happens to boundaries? What happens if I feel in danger? Like all these things. And when I tried my own surrender experiment, this is like now 8 years ago, over 8 years ago, 9 years ago, I don't know, something like that. Um, I started to say yes to everything, including where it didn't feel right. And I realized this is not what it means. Okay. Michael Singer, and again, this is just my opinions. I'm not affiliated. I didn't, ask him. This is just my own take. He doesn't mean to override your deeper knowing or your intuition. It doesn't mean anything everybody asks you, you always have to say yes. What he's talking about, and what he was essentially doing, he was able to distinguish, and I don't know if he thought exactly about it like this, but he was able to distinguish what was his intellectual thinking or egoic thinking, but in a negative sense, meaning like stuff that he thinks and conditioning and all these kind of things, versus being with what is at a very deep level. I call it being in source, so that you're very present and there's another part of you that knows if something is okay or not. And very often for some people, that means say yes a lot more. Okay, because they realize that, they were saying no, not based on wisdom, not based on their higher self, but based on conditioning or fear or all sorts of things, right? So once I understood that for myself, and the way I found out is because, again, I fell into the misunderstanding, okay, this is saying yes all the time. And I had a couple of situations where, oh my God, I should not have said yes. This is really not good, right? So I realized, oh, okay, this is actually dropping behind the thinking and then trusting the deeper knowing. And so if you read the book, I've read the book several times, I listened to it, if you read the book more than once, you notice that he does make choices and he does say no. It might not share it or emphasize it. For example, okay, he buys this piece of land decides to stay there and to meditate, builds his own house, it stays there, he meditates twice a day, right? And for the rest of his life, except towards the end where there's a whole trial and stuff and he has to go away for a little bit, he basically is always there. He doesn't, and I think when he was young also he goes one time to California, but essentially he's always there, okay? And he ends up building a big company on it and all that, right? I cannot imagine that, as his life progressed, he hasn't had many invitations and many opportunities, whether directly or indirectly, to go and travel, to go and move somewhere else, to go, so he was saying no, right? It's like he was very committed to certain things. So when you read the book, he's not emphasizing it, but he has certain commitments, first of all, to his spiritual practice and to where he lives, where he is. And he sticks to that, right? Um, so I don't know if Michael Singer writing this book, if he just wasn't aware. We all are not aware of certain things that come more natural to us, or if he just made a choice that he really wanted to teach people to be more open and get over themselves with a lot of disclosure and say no. But if you read the book carefully, you'll see that for all the yeses he's saying, he's also making choices, right? And he does set boundaries. Okay. So that's one thing. The saying yes versus, it's not about saying yes all the time. It's about not getting caught up in your own thinking and conditioned patterning and all that, and actually being with your deeper knowing and being open. Which brings me to the second thing, which I think is beautiful. Especially, this is a podcast about doing work you love. So I think this is really the book shines, with this. More than once, Michael Singer finds something that he has to do or enjoys, doing. And then the story is like, for example, he builds his house, and then somebody asks him to build another house, and then he gets into building houses, right? Like that. So, and then later, he gets really passionate about computer programming when it's like the beginning of computer programming, right? So, really long time ago. And then he starts to, he stays up all night to study and to learn. And then I don't remember the whole thing, but essentially, people start asking him to create some programs for them, and he starts getting into building programs for medical building. Okay, and again, if you haven't read the book, maybe you want to stop right now and read the book and come back because lots of spoilers. So anyway, he gets into creating programs for medical billing, and this thing just picks up and becomes, a huge billion-dollar corporation. It's very interesting because you really see at play a couple of things. Number one, he's following what he enjoys. Okay, he's not coming to it like, okay, what should I do in my life, blah blah blah, because probably if he had come to that, it would have been like, I want to be a spiritual teacher or something, or I don't know what he would have come up with, right? But he's really following more of like, what do I enjoy? Let me do it. Almost like it's useful, it's playful, I have energy around this, so I want to do it, right? So there is that part. And then he's tuned into the response. And I think this is the really big thing. I coach people around career change, doing what they want. And I think the coaching profession is so set on what you want and intellectual exercises about what you want. The beautiful thing about the surrender experiment is that it really shows in real life how what you want might show up through your energy, might show up through your interests, might show up through something you need to do. And then you have to tune in and be responsive to the response you get. So for a lot of us, that's the difficult part. We find something we like. So either, usually this is how it goes. Either you find something you like, and then you have all these thoughts about you shouldn't. Okay. This was me. Like I would never do what I'm doing now if I listen to the voice. I had for years ideas of helping people changing careers, but it was like, well, how are you going to make money and how this and how that, and so you block yourself. Or you find what you like, but then you're so attached to it and you want to do it the way you want to do it, and you have all these reasons why you should serve these people or doing this way, you tune out of the response out there. But instead, what you see in the surrender experiment is that there's an inner drive, there's an inner engagement, and then outside there's a response. And sometimes it's the opposite, where people ask Michael Singer to do something, like they ask him to teach or they ask him to host certain gurus and spiritual figures, and he doesn't feel like doing it. But then when he meditates and lets go of the thinking, which again, in my opinion, is not saying yes to everything, he lets go of the thinking, then he responds to what's out there. And so that starts flowing. He's in the flow again. Okay. But said that, when they ask him to do something and he responds, he's not doing it out of like, yeah, well, I guess I need money, so I'll just like wing it, and he's doing it from this deeper level. So he's again engaged with it as an act of service, or as a purposeful act, right? So that's really the beauty of this. I think if you can take this lesson on, I think things open up, which brings me to the two big things. There's many more. We're just starting here. With the two big things, other things that I think I want to talk about here. One is manifesting. Okay. If you worked with me and you've been around me for a while, my content, you know that I am not a big fan of the idea of manifesting. I think very often the popular idea around manifesting is that you think something and you make it happen, as in like you control things, it's magical thinking. Sometimes it's very egoic. Okay. What we're seeing in the surrender experiment is not manifesting, is tuning into something that's much bigger than you. That's what I call source. That's not what Michael Singer calls it. But you let go of the small self, and as you tune into something much bigger than you, that has its own flow, its own knowing, its own, in my opinion, there is something there that will carry you. And this is again where the surrender experiment shows a little bit of this, but maybe it's not the best book for it. Sometimes the carrying you doesn't look like everything works out, like in material terms, or in a Hollywood ending, happy ending kind of way. It's more like maybe there's a spiritual lesson, maybe there's something that needs to that you have to go through, right? So it's really not, I think you can see that as like, if I do the surrender experiment, I'll never have problems in life, nothing bad will ever happen to me. I really don't think that's what the book means, even though it can sound like that. Okay. But I think you have to go much deeper in that. And so the biggest thing, I think, when people don't like this, there's only one person that I recommended this to that really was very upset at me and didn't like it. I think it's when they take it too much at face value and don't understand this is a spiritual book, and so take it at a spiritual level. What do I mean? So, Michael Singer's story, he becomes a billionaire. He has all this luck, you could say. Like, there's a lot of privilege, essentially. Okay, you can imagine somebody of a different demographic or a different time, like even if you try now to buy property in the same place, probably more expensive. Like, there's a lot of that if you take it in a literal way, you can be like, what the heck, this guy doesn't understand privilege or all of that. But that book is not about that. Like, that book is not about here's how you make a lot of money, or it's not, in my opinion, even like here's how you run a business, or here, like he's just telling you his story, but the lessons in it, they're about you letting go of whatever is holding you back and opening yourself up to your deeper self and the world. And for every one of us, that's going to look different, you know? And so, even the part about saying yes all the time, yeah, if your problem is that you're constantly saying no and you're constantly blocking other people and you're constantly, and you're meant to instead be more open, then it's appropriate to say yes more often, you know? But for some of us, what we need to learn is actually when we let go of the mind, our mind is always saying, I always have to be nice. I always have to say yes. I always have to, let people into my space. Like, so for us, what we might take by embarking on the surrender experiment is actual boundaries. This for me was really amazing because I struggled a lot with boundaries, but when I started to understand the spiritual teachings and understand more and more, being in source and listening to my deeper wisdom, setting boundaries for me became like effortless in many more situations where I didn't have an issue saying no because I was surrendering to the perfection of life. And life sometimes requires you to say no. That's what you're meant to be. So it's very important, or what you're meant to say. So it's very important with the surrender experiment to really not read it as a literal tale of making money, being rewarded by meditating, and then money will come and manifest, people showing up for you in the middle of nowhere just because you're sitting there, or any of that. Like, the teachings are teachings of really profound nature that you have to then not only contemplate but literally find for yourself in your life. Because I think as much as we want to get these things from a book, and a book can be a spark, a book can inspire us, I didn't get this stuff until I got, in life with it. Like, okay, this is uncomfortable. What is it my ego making it uncomfortable? Is it my thinking, or is it my deeper knowing? I had to find out for myself which one was which, and nobody could really teach me. Like, even when I work with clients, I can share this, I can hold space, talking and being listened to helps, but bottom line, they have in their own life engage and come back to the session. And the ones that don't, well, I can't help, they're meant to get this, I guess, some other way, right? You have to engage in your own life with these teachings. All right, other things, other misunderstandings, misunderstood takeaways from this book. Oh, here's one. So I visited the Temple of the Universe. You can visit, you can read the blog post on my blog. I'll put the link in the notes. But I think a big misunderstanding is that you'll notice if you read the book, if you read the book, that Michael Singer doesn't talk much about his wife, and his daughter. So all of his family, really, even family of origin and stuff, like he's very, he's keeping to the spiritual thing, right? A little bit about business. But even in business, it's not like it's telling you a ton of things about it. But you really notice that, wow, he's really not talking much about, his relationship, his primary relationships. So for some people, that can feel like, oh, what's going on with that, but I think that's a little bit also of, an assumption. For example, people started to talk about that, in my blog comments. Some people asked about that, and somebody from, I think maybe Germany, somewhere in Europe, said, I didn't find that weird at all. I don't think it's appropriate to talk about your personal life, right? So some of it, I think the culture makes you more, makes you notice more, that or not. But I would invite you to two things. One, it might be simply a privacy issue. Okay, like maybe, his spouse or his daughter don't want to, have their private things in the book. They're like, great, you write about your own spiritual journey. I don't want to have my story in your book, right? That's totally possible. And the second thing is that, well, a spiritual teacher might be a great teacher on one thing and not in another, you know? And I think this is really important. Michael Singer doesn't have to be now your guru, that everything in life you're learning from Michael Singer, like I'm a huge fan of the book. As I said, it changed my life. I gift it to people. But my coaching is not just a surrender experiment, I do a lot of things with some clients. I don't even talk about it because it doesn't seem that's what they need, you know? So you can get all sorts of lessons from this book, but maybe if you're looking for, I don't know, how to be happy in your marriage, maybe there are other spiritual teachers that talk about that specifically. So I think it's really important to also remember that and not take that as some sign of something, because you see it. What else? What else is coming up for me? I think there is one more thing. I'm forgetting. Hold on. I made myself a note. I'm gonna go look at my note here. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. Okay. A really big one. Spiritual bypassing is another thing that I think is tricky. I have a video, I'll put that in the show notes as well, that explains what spiritual bypassing is, but very quickly, it's basically when people use spiritual teachings to check out of life. It's sort of like, those people, that are like, oh, I just meditate and everything is love and peace. And then they get mad right away about things, right? Or yes, I love everybody. But then like they only hang out in the little spiritual community. And if they don't do their thing, it's like, so spiritual bypassing is very frequent. And I think it's something that all of us who, are on the spiritual path have to always be alert to. So I think sometimes the surrender experiment can be taken in a very spiritual bypassing sort of way. In other words, because Michael Singer is talking about, how he meditates and things just happened, and that's the narrative. I think it can be really taken on any problem in life. You just go meditate, and it will just go away. So two things. One, as I said before, this is a spiritual book. If he was to write a book about how to run, I don't remember how big his company got, but there were like a ton of people working for him. He will probably tell you all sorts of things that are not in that book. That book is a spiritual book. He just happened to then create a company, and it's very unusual combination. So it makes like for quite interesting reading, right? Because of that. But that's not the point. It's not a business manual. Okay, it's a spiritual book. The other part of it is that there is actually a very moving moment in the book where he really talks about waking up from his own spiritual bypassing. And that's a moment where he reveals how when he was feeling intense feelings and he would go into meditation, he would see himself locking sort of upset Mickey into a room. And at some point, he decides, again, through all upset Mickey, his own self being upset, having feelings. And at some point, he sees himself actually opening the door to that room and inviting his own self out with all the feelings. And it's a beautiful moment in the book because it really says how in that moment he realizes that that was really hurtful and how he never did that again after that. And I find even now, mentioning it, I find it so moving because that is again one part of the book that I think is maybe overlooked. When he writes, he's not writing about a ton of his feelings and all this thing in a certain way, and so it might seem very spiritual bypassing, but to my mind, the invitation is to actually be in a deeper part of yourself without letting go of your feelings, right? Just developing a good way to embrace yourself and to love yourself and to really be in a loving feeling in the world with the ups and downs of life. So you're not gonna get all your answers from a book. And I don't know what Michael Singer would say about my thoughts here. But these are really the things that I've come to understand from the book over, as I said, almost a decade of reading it many, many times and listening to it and visiting. And I think it's a beautiful book. I think it's a book that you can just really, every time you read it, you'll probably discover something different for yourself. One thing, for example, that was really interesting to me, for some reason, the first time I read it, I didn't notice how much of this, like, these bits and pieces of, I don't know how you would call them, like, he has all these experiences about feeling energy, that I didn't even notice that the first time, for example. Like, I was so not interested in it. To me, it was just like, oh, who knows? Maybe he felt some energy, maybe it's not even that was not even like, I wasn't interested. And it was funny because it's only later when I read it again that I started to notice that. And I also, as I meditated more, I had my own experiences that before I wouldn't thought necessarily possible. So that was an interesting thing. But it's another part that if you read that book thinking, oh, I'm gonna meditate to then, have a Kundalini awakening or whatever, you're expecting as supernatural, don't do that. You know, keep the book is a spiritual book and it's a very down to earth book. It's telling you that if you get out of your own way, you can trust something deeper to guide you. It doesn't mean your whole life will be perfect. It doesn't mean that you will stop feeling, and it doesn't mean that you're gonna get all the answers, be enlightened, and that's it. You never have to work hard at anything else again. It's a powerful story to awaken something in you. All right, I'm pretty sure once I close this off, I will remember something else that I meant to say, but I record this in one take. So here we go for today. My name is Aurora Menegallo. This is the Repurpose Your Purpose podcast. You can find all the episodes and more on my website at repurposeyourpurpose.com.